Look at you sporting the tank top and the gold chain.
After the beatboxing, man.
Rep- yeah, nice.
Yeah. Oh, let me just get my bottle of water really quick.
You got it, dude. Hello. Welcome to another podcast here at iAnimate. I'm your host, Larry Vasquez, and with me again is Rick Arroyo. How you doing, Rick?
Doing really good. How you doing, Larry?
Awesome. You chilly right now?
You know what? The weather here in Montreal is not too bad, but it's going good. It's going really good.
Rick's visiting his hometown here up in Montreal, so a little bit different weather here than in California, right?
The weather is definitely different, and already missed the weather, the warm weather. But honestly, it's been a fantastic week for us.
Awesome, man. Got our guest tonight, Michael Jungbluth. He's a senior animator at Zenimax Online Studios. He's shipped such games as Call of Duty, Lord of the Rings, Singularity, and so I think we're going to have a really cool podcast with this guy here. He's heading up the Animation Bootcamp, correct, over at GDC?
That's correct. It's going to be the first year of the Animation Bootcamp at GDC. GDC is a huge event. Animation's been making a big push, and he's starting that up, and it's going to be an awesome podcast.
Cool. All right. Well, let's pull him in. Hi, Mike.
How are you?
Hi. Very good. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Good. How you guys doing?
Really
Awesome.
well. Really well.
Right.
Really appreciate you joining us on this podcast.
Oh, my pleasure.
We like talking about animation, and obviously you do too, so it's should be a fun show here, but we do appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem.
First things first, I love your LinkedIn picture.
Oh, right on.
With the bear high five. Love it.
Yeah, my wife does taxidermy, so that was one of her pieces, and I was like, it looks like he's going to high five. I have to do this.
It's awesome. Very cool. Have you had a chance to meet Rick yet?
No, just through email.
Okay.
Through email. We haven't met yet, but we're gonna try to work something out at GDC, which we'll come to.
Yeah, we definitely want to talk about that. Tell you what, let's jump into it. What's your background? How'd you get into animation?
Yeah, so I went to school for all 2D traditional stuff. This is a little school in Pennsylvania nobody's ever heard of, but really great professors. After graduating, throughout school, I was like, I hate computer stuff because it's evil and it steals the art away from the artist, right? And then I graduated and realized, all right, well, I got to learn it because that's pretty much where the majority of the jobs are. So I moved out to LA with a buddy who was working out there, and he showed me the ropes. And I got my first gig working on a PSP game at this little startup studio. I was out in LA for about a year, and wasn't really my style. I enjoy a little bit more of the countryside. So I moved to Austin, worked down there for a year on a couple games. Moved up to then Raven Software, worked on Wolfenstein, Singularity, and Call of Duty for a couple years. Went out to Monolith for about a year and a half, worked out there on some Lord of the Rings stuff, and now I'm at Zenimax working on Elder Scrolls Online.
You're working on what at Zenimax?
Elder Scrolls Online.
Okay, very cool.
Awesome stuff.
What's been one of your favorite games that you worked on so far?
I think my favorite so far that's released has been Singularity. That was the first game I worked on that wasn't a property that belonged to somebody else, right? It was our chance to make a game that was completely unique to us, to the team, and the challenges that come with that, but then the excitement that comes from that as well, getting to kind of make your own mark on characters as opposed to just telling the story with somebody else's, which was pretty exciting.
So what were some of the things that you found most challenging in making that game that was kind of, like you said, your own?
I think it was trying to focus on like one direction. When I worked on like the Hulk game or something, it was pretty easy to go, oh, I know what the Hulk should do. And then you've already got a direction to run in. But with a lot of this stuff on Singularity, we're getting these monsters that you haven't really seen before. And you can go, well, it kind of looks like this. So I can kind of start down that direction or not and just do something entirely different. So trying to say, hey, this is cool. Let me choose one direction and go on it, as opposed to getting distracted by doing a million different other things.
So basically, on this one here, the fun part of it was that you had some freedom, but that also made it very difficult because now it's like, which direction do I take, right?
Yeah. It goes from like lots of restrictions on all these games that have a bunch of different stakeholders in it to now it's just us, and you've got no restraint and no constraints, and you're like, all right, well, feast or famine.
Now, what was some of your big achievements for that game that you felt like you walked away from it? That was awesome.
There was one of the characters in there. It's this creature called the Revert, and for a long time they weren't really sure what to do with it as a creature. They were like, well, it's kind of like a zombie mutant, but we don't want it to just be a zombie. It was kind of all over the map, and they weren't really sure what to do with it. So my idea was to treat it more like it was like this wounded animal, right? Where when you first see it, you kind of go, oh, and you feel bad because it's in pain, and elicits that emotional response of like, I should try and help it. But then when you get near it and it lashes out at you, you get that emotional contrast where all of a sudden, oh crap, like now you're freaked out because there's this thing that's wild that you realize you don't have any control of, but you've made yourself vulnerable as well in how you approached it, right? So I really liked that idea and kind of got to run with that. And that was the thing that I was most proud of by the end of that.
What are some of your involvements as being a senior animator? I was talking with Rick here. I don't have as much on the games background right now. I've done mostly of the feature workshops at iAnimate, but having talked with Rick, I'm kind of starting to get an understanding of how some of that kind of stuff works. And one of the things I was talking with Rick about is just that balance between animation and design. What was your involvement with the design process with the game Singularity versus being an animator?
Singularity was kind of a good one because that was kind of the first game where I started to feel pretty comfortable with the role of like being an animator, right? Like by that point, like I was like, okay, I kind of understand the constraints that come with game animation, and I'm pretty comfortable within working within those constraints. And it was kind of that moment where I said, all right, well, I know I want to advance and start to take on more of a senior role, and looking at this space for like where a senior animator kind of goes, it seemed like for most places there were two tracks as a senior animator. There was the really technical guys that had been with the company for like 15 years or more, and they really understood the engine and they really understood the tech that went underneath how to implement the animations best into the game. And then there were just those animators that were like the best. They could animate whatever was given to them. And I'm not really very technical, and while I always strive to be the best animator, the reality is like there's always going to be somebody that can animate you under the table wherever you're at, right? So I said realistically, like where I kind of see this area that seems to be missing a lot in the studios I've been at is that overlap between game design and animation, right? And I got really interested in starting with Singularity was how as an animator can I help to influence the design, to understand the design, and think of how the character operates not just within the animation but within the gameplay mechanics as well, right? And so it kind of started with the revert there of me going, okay, I know I want it to be a wounded animal, but beyond just the visuals, how do I convey that wounded animal within the way you interact with it in the game and the way you engage with it, both in combat, out of combat, and whatever. And from there, now that's kind of where I've found my role in most of the studios I've worked at since is I love game design, and there are days that I'm like, I'll quit animation, I'm just going to do game design. And then I realize like I love the high concept of game design, like the conceptual side of it, but the day-to-day work of punching numbers into the editor or animating, like animating is always going to win. So, so I try to straddle this fun line of like, I'm going to animate it, but anytime I can get involved in a design discussion, be it content or narrative or gameplay or combat or locomotion or any of that stuff, like systems, I try to throw myself way into it because I think as an animator, we're already thinking of how to balance the reality and the physicality of something with the personality of something, right? And for me, like that's right where game design and animation meet. So.
No, that's very cool because having talked with Rick here, I was asking him, I said, do all game designers have an animation background? He was like, no. So you can see where that disconnect could happen from a game designer's standpoint, not knowing animation, how some of that stuff works actually in the game. Whereas, like you're saying, from your vantage point, you've kind of got the best of both where you can kind of work in both of the areas. And I can see where that would be very valuable. Yeah, I love it. And that was kind of my big thing for wanting to make this boot camp a reality is because I think a lot of animators still view
game design and the role of the player in the game as more than a constraint. Like they're almost a little combative towards it, because you're having to surrender a bit of your control in the creation in a way with games that you don't have to in like cinematics or film and stuff, because you get to kind of drive that performance entirely. But with games, like you are giving up some of that performance to the designers and the programmers and to the player. And instead of looking at that as a constraint, I look at it more like, this is exciting. Like now we're not just focusing on my performance, I'm focusing on the conversation that's happening between the developers and the players.
Well, we've kind of got two segues here. We definitely want to touch upon the boot camp that you're talking about for GDC, but before I think we get into that, let's jump into a little bit of the article I think that you'd written on Gamasutra, because it's kind of dealing what we're talking about right now as far as the animation portion of it, because the articles were basically talking about the 12 principles of animation, but how they primarily deal with games. Can you talk a little bit about some of the article that you wrote on there?
Yeah, so my thinking there was, I knew I wanted to learn more about game design, right? And as I started to look into it and start to talk to designers and read about design and books and things like that, I started to realize that a lot of the principles that they were talking about in game design, I already understood, not with the same names, but in concept. And once I started thinking about it, I realized, oh wow, not just animation principles, but a lot of artistic principles can be applied to design. So I started with the animation principles because obviously those are the ones that I know best and inform me the most in how I already interact with the game, and started thinking, okay, what does anticipation mean to, obviously it's easy to see what it means to like combat design, right? In like enemies and bosses and stuff. Oh, I know what anticipation means. It means, I want to be able to see what they're going to do so I have time to understand as a player and react to it. But what does anticipation mean in level design, right? I was like, I bet that means something. And then you go, oh, it kind of does mean something, because, you want to, in the whole level is kind of anticipating the arc of what's going to happen, right? And, if you come into a room with a whole bunch of ammo laying on the ground, you're now anticipating what's going to happen next, right? And I was like, wow, that's awesome. Like you start to see these Tetris blocks coming together in your mind of how all this stuff kind of lines up. And then from that, the hope is that, okay, now that I understand it, I can better communicate with designers so that when I have an idea about a character, I'm not just saying, hey, I'm going to make it move like this and it'll be cool. I'm going to make it move like this and it will influence the game design, through follow through. And then even if they don't understand what follow through is, I know how to explain what follow through is because of animating. So.
I just want to talk a little bit. You were talking about what are the constraints for game animators, and I would like you to give your take on what those constraints are.
Yeah, I do a podcast with some other game animators, and I remember one of our first episodes. We were like, let's break down like the principles of animation that we have to give up to designers and stuff. And timing is a big one, because you're stuck to the time that the game design dictates, right? So that's definitely a constraint, is when they say we want somebody that's huge to move really, really fast, but I still want them to look really, really heavy. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? Like, I need to have somebody, move from point A to point B in like 8 frames, but I still need to convey weight, right? So that's a big constraint. A lot of times staging is a constraint, because you're giving the player the control of the camera. So you don't get to kind of author it to look good in the shot. You have to author it to look good in a full 180 degrees. And sometimes that's a pain in the butt. And anticipation is a lot of times one that you have to give up, because again, like, things need to be responsive, so they need to happen right away. It's pretty amazing. I think there ends up being like 4 or 5 principles that you kind of have to give up when you're doing game design. And in giving them up, you almost have to understand them even better to a certain degree, because you have to figure out how to fake them in another ways, right? So it's like, oh, I don't have a lot of follow through necessarily, because the player needs to be able to do something else right away. Well, how do I fake that, right? Or how do I get around that? And I mean, they're constraints for sure, but they're also challenges, is the way I like to look at it. And it goes, okay, I'm going to figure out how to do this even without that. Like with one arm tied behind my back, I'm still going to make that look.
Different type of creativity, huh?
Right.
Yeah, and it's been kind of cool when we've added the games workshops to iAnimate. It's given us that nice balance for both types of animation, because animation is animation, but then they're also very different though. And typically, for someone to jump into our games workshop, they'll have had to take in at least the first couple feature workshops to get a grounding in animation, so that now when they go into the games one, they can take what they've learned there and either modify it or, like you're saying there, kind of check some of these ones out and be real creative on how they address some of these constraints.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it takes a fine line of like, especially with like loops or something, you have to create a run cycle or walk cycle. And you've got to find that weird balance between it has to be kind of vanilla enough that you can look at it a bunch of times without seeing like that one kind of cool little quirk that keeps happening and happening and happening. And then eventually you're just like, why is it that every time you run, you have a little snap? Like that just looks silly, but it looks cool when you animate it. But after seeing it as a loop, it's a long time. So you need to make it a little bit vanilla, but not so vanilla that you're like, this is the most boring run animation I've ever seen. And then you're looking at it for like 20 plus hours because that's the main animation you see in the game. So, little things like that, you're like, oh, how do I make it really interesting, but not so interesting that it kind of over dominates and takes you out of the experience.
Yeah. Now, how'd you get into the games arena per se?
It was kind of a fluke. So when I moved out to LA, my buddy was working at Rhythm and Hughes, and he had gotten in there through an apprenticeship. And the plan was that I was going to do an apprenticeship as well, but they ended up not having one. And instead, one of the guys he worked with said, "Hey, my buddy's got looking for an animator at a game studio. Would you be interested?" I said, "Sure, I'll check it out. I just want to animate and have a job doing it." And I started doing it, and at first I was definitely had those growing pains. Like, all right, well, this will work until an apprenticeship opens up, right? There was something about that first moment where I started playing around with the character I was animating, and I was just like, "Wow, this is awesome!" Like, it was this weird moment of when I'm animating a character, you start to build a relationship with it, right? As you're animating it in Maya or Max or whatever. And then once I got to play with it in game, it was like I got to continue that relationship in a new way, right? And I was like, wow, this is cool. And at that moment, I was like, this is it. Like, this is awesome. I love this.
Nice. Real quick, I want to come back to your podcast. I want to definitely plug that. Can you give us the website for that?
Yeah, it's reanimators.net.
Reanimators.net. How many podcasts have you guys got now?
I think we're up to episode 41.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we've been doing it for maybe 5 years.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, you just embarrassed us. This is our 11th.
Oh, yeah. No. Oh, you guys are already kicking our butt. I think we were like 3 years in by the time we had 11. It was three of us that worked together down in Texas, and we started it when we were like, let's just talk about animation, and this will be cool. And after about 7 episodes, we all moved away, right? So, one of us, I moved up to Wisconsin, another dude moved to Europe, one guy actually stayed in Texas, and so, that's kind of impeded us from doing them as often as we like. But the benefit has been it's allowed us to, I think, pull in more guests, because the way we do it is it's always the three of us, and then we bring in a guest. And sometimes it's about animation, or sometimes it's, we'll have somebody on that does like UI design or, a programmer or whatever. And we just kind of use it as a chance to geek out and talk about whatever's interesting us at the time and learn more about like different avenues that we might not know about.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's what we've been trying to do as well with these podcasts, is just get a nice variety of people. I think just anytime you get anybody on there, you're going to have a variety because people are different. It brings entertainment to it because you don't know stuff that you don't know. And so anytime you start getting some variety in there, you're learning some new stuff here. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Who's been some of your favorite guests that you've had on?
Oh man. I don't know. We've had, I think my favorite episodes have been ones that have less to do about animation and more about the industry as a whole. So we've had Lee Alexander. She does a bunch of press stuff on Gama Sutra and Kotaku and stuff. We had her on to talk about the relationship of, between developers and the press. We had one of the guys I worked with at Raven, who's at BioWare now, and did one about like ethnicity in games. And, those are the ones that usually get really exciting, because those are the ones I have no real idea going into it about. Like, it's not like I go into it like, yes, I strongly agree of this. And I go into it and go, I don't know anything about it. Inform me. And then by the end of it, like I end up finding I'm really interested in this and kind of go down a rabbit hole of all sorts of new games and books and ideas and stuff like that. So
Right on.
yeah, we're kind of all over the map with it, but I kind of like it that way.
Yeah, there you go. Those are fun. We'll definitely put that in our show notes. So reanimators.net. Check it out. GDC, you want to talk to us a little bit about this boot camp that you're doing?
Yeah, it is. It's exciting.
It's frozen there. You're just stunned.
I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. It's
yeah.
So,
well, I mean, how did you start it up? What were the reasons to start up the animation bootcamp?
Yeah, I think it came from a few different things. The first is I think there's going to a bunch of these different things like GDC and CGraph and stuff. I'd always gone in really excited to talk to other animators about the possibilities of growing game animation. And if there were many game animation talks, most of them seem to come from like the creative directors or the studio leads talking about the performance capture stuff. Like, oh, look, we got this actor in. And it felt more like a behind the scenes thing on a Blu-ray that you would get, as opposed to something that really seemed like something from the trenches of the actual animators, right? And talking with a bunch of other animators and stuff, it definitely felt like, why isn't there more talks like this? And we realized, well, probably just because it's like that chicken and egg thing. If there were more opportunities for game animators, would they do it? Or is it because they're not getting active, there aren't these opportunities? And we said, well, then let's just talk to GDC and let's see if we can't create like a summit or something and do it. And they were really receptive to it. So we submitted the idea of, okay, let's actually get animators to come in and talk about what it is on a core level, very specifically about something they've done in their game. So I got some people I've worked with in the past, some people that I just really respected online, whose stuff I really liked. And we ended up coming up with I think a pretty awesome day-long experience with, I want to say 7 talks that start with, we have a buddy of mine, Jaleel, who I went to school with, who's an animator at DreamWorks. And he kind of starts in, do you know him?
No, Dave Hubert has mentioned that we need to get him in on here. So
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jaleel's awesome. So, as I started coming up with the idea of, okay, what should we have at this? Most of the animators I talk to, we still kind of have this love affair with, well, film. Film is like the holy grail, right? Because, again, like you don't have those constraints. You've got the better rigs. You've got the higher fidelity. Like, it's like animation purity, right? So I said, all right, well, we need somebody from film to start the day off because you want to get somebody that's excited. And I think it works really well that way because let's just examine animation without any of the constraints, just at its purest. So we're going to have Jaleel come in and talk for an hour about making an audience believe. And then from there, the rest of the day, we kind of add in more game stuff and layer in how you take those principles and start working it up, right? So the next talk we have is a senior animator I worked with at Monolith, Amy Drobeck, who had worked at Disney for like 10 years. And she'll be talking about animal and creature movement and personality and really starting to get into that, right? So it's like, okay, did what Jaleel did. Now we've got, again, like something that's a little bit more film-based or traditional-based, but you're starting to think about with some of the constraints of game animation. From there, I thought it was really important that we had somebody from a Mocap background to talk about an animator's actual involvement with Mocap, right? I think a lot of the times at these conferences, you see the Mocap from the side of the production, like the producers saying, look, it's the silver bullet. You can get, Ellen Page to come in and act something for you, and it's great. And they sell it kind of as a feature, but without necessarily talking about what the benefits are for an animator to have. And I know I'd been anti-Mocap for a long time until I worked at Raven, and they had a really nice Mocap room. And I go, oh, okay, Mocap is really boring when you just get a list of assets that you had no sort of creative input on. And then you're just kind of cleaning stuff up and you feel like a cog in the wheel. But once you're in there and you're getting to direct and interact with the actors and getting to have a chance to take some of what you would have had your intent on blocking or conceptualizing it and work with them, it got really exciting for me. So we have the animation director from Hitman coming in and talking about kind of mocap best practices. From there, we have Jonathan Cooper, one of the animation directors at Ubisoft Montreal, who is the animation director on Assassin's Creed 3.
Yeah, we just actually interviewed him last week.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Or actually
Yeah.
a couple nights ago, actually.
Yeah, it was like 2 nights ago. We brought him on, and personally, I'm really excited about GDC, and I know a lot of animators that I talk to, our students are really excited about it. So this is a great lineup.
Yeah.
But continue on. Just continue on. Don't stop.
So he's going to be talking about their process from beginning to ship of how they kind of reworked all the stuff they'd done for Connor, the assassin in Assassin's Creed 3. So talking from the original concept of how they wanted to update his locomotion and combat from idea to completion. So the idea there is, okay, now you've seen all these different parts that kind of come together to make game animation. Here's the talk that shows you how to actually apply that to the actual production. After him, we've got Ryan Duffin, who I do the podcast with. He's a senior animator at EA. He's worked on Battlefield and Medal of Honor and Killzone 2. And he's going to be giving a talk about first-person animation and kind of how to add a little extra purpose to it and things to think about when, okay, you've got two hands and maybe a weapon. How do you convey everything that needs to happen and the personality of a character or the personality of a weapon or all that different types of stuff. And that's one that I was really excited about because I've done a little bit of first-person stuff, but I get really excited about, okay, how do you convey more with less, right? So that'll be a fun one. And then the last talk of the day is going to be a combined talk with myself and Ed Hooks, who wrote Acting for Animators. And we're going to be talking about how to apply acting and animation principles to game design. And that'll kind of be the one where I hope, since it's like the last talk in the day, that moving forward as animators take part in the rest of GDC, and there won't be a lot of animation-specific talks there, right? Because it is so multidisciplinary. They can go, oh, okay, there isn't a specific animation talk today, but there's this interesting thing about level design. Let me go to that. And I can already start to think of how I would fit into that and how I would help to advance that conversation. So hopefully that's the talk that kind of says, okay, here's all the stuff that's got you excited about animation, and now let's get you excited about game development, right? And then the very last part of the day is we'll have a roundtable with Tim Borelli, who's the lead animator at Fifth Cell. And every year he's done a tech art roundtable at GDC, but this year he's changed it to character animation and performance roundtable. So every day at GDC then, it's open to everyone who attends. So hopefully, we'll get designers and programmers and other artists and writers to talk about animation and character performance. Hopefully the idea is with the boot camp, we get all these animators super excited and kind of get us all on one page of how we want to help push forward the industry. And then the boot camp or the roundtable every day at GDC is a chance to hopefully help to spread the word and get excitement and bring in other disciplines and keep it going.
Animation. Love it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's big. Like, we're this is kind of our shot to prove to GDC and I think the game industry that, as animators, I think we can offer even more than just like, here's your walk cycle.
That's awesome.
I think there's a chance for us to do a lot more, and hopefully this is a good first shot at getting that ball rolling.
Well, Michael, let me first applaud you for going forward with GDC. I think that's fantastic. I also want to say that at iAnimate, this is one of the reasons why we have the game workshop, because there is a big difference between just doing feature and then working the game. Like I've been telling to our students, or we talk often on our podcast, that I consider myself a game developer as well as an animator, because you're dealing with so many different disciplines and you have to understand the other disciplines and how to communicate and how to achieve that goal. So I think that's fantastic. But I want to ask you, what do you think are the different skill sets like a game animator should learn or bring to a studio if they want to succeed in the game field?
Yeah, I think a big one is the ability to work quick and dirty and not be afraid to block something out quickly and show it off and put it in the game and allow that feedback to come not just from other animators, but from the designers and stuff. I think it's one of those things that's really hard as an artist to show off your baby when it's not ready, right? But I think with games, like, you need to be willing to do that because so many other things come after you that could break it or that could change it or make it better, that I know for a long time I was always afraid to do that. I was like, no, wait until this animation's done and then I'll let you see it. And then you're wasting all this time, or you're going down a road that didn't work. So I think that's a hard one to kind of get used to, because a lot of this stuff they need is like a walk cycle or something like that. And those take a lot of time to do right. And it's finding that balance between, okay, this conveys what they need, but doesn't look broken. So I think that's something to really kind of focus on. And I know, like, when I was in school, like, a lot of those walk cycle tests and stuff were the things that I was least interested in, because those were things that were just getting in the way from, like, I want to make a fun short, right? And the reality of it was like, if I don't understand how to do a cycle well, or the process of going through that and the iteration on it, when I do get to the short, I'm just going to kind of be left floating in the wind without any idea of how to actually execute on it. So I think those are things that a lot of times are missed. You'll see, like, these really cool reels with over the top action and acting and all this cool stuff, and then you're like, oh, let me see a walk cycle, and we're like, oh, well, I have somebody walk and then run and jump, and it's like, well, that's good. Like, I can see you got an understanding of timing and weight, but how does it work within itself, right? And how can you convey that walk cycle that feels connected to that jump that happens somewhere else, right? And starting to think of stuff systemically, as opposed to just like on a per asset or per shot basis is pretty valuable.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of our students, we repeat to them. We're not just teaching animation, making it feel right and look great and giving character, but also we talk about game development and game designing. Like we talked with Jonathan Cooper when I was working at Ubisoft. It's a very artistic, animator-friendly studio. Animators design systems as much as a designer, or sometimes even often take control pretty much completely of a system. Like you built it from A to Z. You're responsible for the feel of it, the look of it, and making sure when it plays right and everything. And that's something that we try to teach our students about design. Do you find yourself designing a lot of the systems now where you're at, or is it really more? Because I mean, every studio is different. So, but we want to make sure our animators are ready for this. But do you find yourself designing systems?
I think it definitely depends on every studio, right? Like, when I was at WB, I had this really, it was kind of the dream scenario for me of somebody would say, hey, we've got a creature and here's the name of it. But that was all they had. So before we even had a concept artist come in, it would be me sitting down with like the combat designer and maybe the art director. And it was like, okay, like, let's figure out what it would look like. And at the same time, think of the way it would move and then the way you would interact with it. And that was awesome, because it was like, all right, let's come up with the idea. And then I'm already thinking about it on the animation level before you even see a model, right? And then you get to kind of help influence that model, which was great. And then at Zenimax, it's been really interesting because with an MMO, you've got all these different systems happening, right? And it's been really interesting getting to work with like content designers on quest stuff, and then people that populate the world, and how little vignettes like that might happen. So it's really kind of been different everywhere. Depending on the game, we could take, like on Singularity, I was like, you get this chunk and you get enemies, or you get, like the time manipulation device that was in the game. And as an animator, you're also responsible in figuring out all the assets and how all that stuff works together. So yeah, to some degree. And I think it's up to the person who's animating it to have that excitement for it, to want to get as involved with that. Because there are definitely some animators that are just like, I just want to put my headphones on and I just want to animate all day. And, I think you need some of those as much as the ones that are like, I want to spend, an equal amount of time, working with designers and figuring it out, right? So, yeah, I definitely am a firm believer of the idea of you're a game developer first, and then you're either an animator or a modeler or a rigger or whatever second, right? Like, everything is in service to the game and the experience.
One of the things I'm liking that I'm hearing about the GDC that you're talking about is just, again, the information that's going out about animation and informing people about it. We had a talk at CTN with some of these guys here, Richard, and some of the other guys here, talking about the games division here that we have, and talking about just animation in general, but how that plays that role in there. But I love how you're kind of layering it on. Like you said, you're starting out with someone who's more in the feature, giving them the education in animation, period. And then now starting to kind of fine tune it a little bit, how it works into the games as well. And so I'm really liking that. That sounds like a lot of fun here. And when is GDC?
It is March. So it goes from March 25th to 29th, but the boot camp is Monday, March 25th.
Awesome. So the game that you're working on right now is an MMO. What's been some of your bigger challenges working on an MMO?
I mean, it's not out yet, so obviously there's not a whole lot I can talk about it. But I think a lot of it was just there are constraints that are built in within any MMO, just because of the amount of players that'll be on the screen and the all the things that kind of come together, and you surrender so much of your design and your character and your creations to the player, right? Because truly they're a world where players want to be able to interact and engage on any level. So anytime you're removing control from them, it really rips them out of that experience, right? So it's one of those things where I think the actual animation itself probably isn't as challenging, because in previous studios, I'd worked on it, it's like, oh, you've got this big scripted sequence with a bunch of different characters and they're all interacting. You got somebody grabbing them and throwing them and running up somebody else's face and then sliding down a troll, and all those really big, crazy, over the top things that are fun to animate. And with this, it is a lot more single assets, but you're having to figure out, okay, how does all of this work together? And that took me a while to really wrap my head around, in thinking, oh, okay, yeah, I'm animating this, but I have to think, how does it look when there's like 20 of them on the screen? And how does it look if there's 20 of them on the screen and then there's 4 different players doing 4 different things to them? Getting all of that stuff figured out, and again, kind of surrendering some of that artistic control a little bit, that need to I want to know exactly how this is going to look at all times. And you kind of go, I have no idea how this is going to work or look half the time, because anything can change it. Has definitely been an interesting challenge.
Is that kind of fun trying to anticipate a lot of that, though?
Yeah, and I think where it's fun too is because you have all those different systems, where before I think the challenges and the creativity and the ability to kind of change and adapt in kind of what you're working on in other games was like, oh, now I've got this new way of taking down this big boss creature. With this one, even if the animation isn't as complex, I get to go for a while I'll work on some monsters, and then for a while I'm going to work on some postures and emotes and stuff, and how that works within the world, and then now I'm going to work on some player stuff. And so I think what kind of keeps the spice of life going is the fact that you do get to kind of work on all these different little things, and kind of get your fingers in a bunch of different pots.
Yeah, because that's what I was actually going to ask you. What are some of your favorite things about the games industry in regards to animation? That kind of sounds like that being part of it, is that you get a variety of different types of animation, creatures, big boss, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, and depending on the property too, you can go from with Singularity or even Elder Scrolls, you can go from something that's weird and fantastic and kind of magical, and then you've got something that's a little bit more mechanical, right? And you're going, oh, okay, you get to kind of really try a variety of different monsters and ideas and things like that, which is always kind of exciting.
What are some of your favorite kind of games to play?
Oh man, it changes all the time. For a long time, I just want give me the story, and I just want to play through that. And then I think I played so many of those that I kind of got fatigued from that. So lately it's been a lot more of the I think kind of the smaller indie games have really excited me a lot, this last year. Like Mark of the Ninja, Spelunky, Papo and Yo. These are games where I've really felt like the art and the design really understood each other, and you could see the heart in those games. So those excite me, but without a doubt, the game that got me most interested in game animation, and the one that I still champion till the day I die, is Mark of Kree. I remember getting that game in college, and even the instruction booklet had a flip book in the corner of it of the main character sneaking up behind a guy and bashing him on the head with a sword. And even I'm just flipping through the instruction booklet when I couldn't be playing the game. I'm just oh, this is amazing. Oh, this is great. This is gorgeous. And the animation of that game, you could see that every step of that there was an animator going, no, I want to do it this way. And they really got to influence the design of it, right? So, every time you switch your weapon, you put the one weapon away, and then you grab the other one out of the backpack in the very specific location, you pull it out. And it looks gorgeous, and then there are moments in the fight where you're like, oh, this is so frustrating, because why am I having to put this away and pull it out? But it's so cool looking that you're like, I don't care. It's just the weight of it is great. And that game I still geek out over without a doubt. if there would have been more time at the boot camp, I would have been like, we need to do a Marco Cree retrospective because I just want to listen to them talk for like a day straight.
Oh yeah, anytime a company would put a flip book in their packet there, they're art driven in animation.
Yeah, they weren't messing around. That game, I love it. So PS2, if you can find it, play it because you'll just go nuts for it.
Working with Mocap, we've talked a little bit about this in some of our past podcasts. Can you talk about how you work with it, how you've adjusted with it, what you like, what you don't like?
Yeah. So my first approach to using it was like the worst case scenario because we had outsourced the direction of the mocap, and we had an outsourced studio that was doing the initial cleanup, but then we had to integrate it. So we didn't have the pipeline for it at all. And it was just a nightmare. And if we needed to fix something, like we didn't have the tools or the know how to do it. So it was like the worst parts of what you think of mocap is of just like, hi, I'm just here like cleaning up some fingers and making sure the elbows don't pop. It sucked. And where, like I was saying earlier, where I got excited was when I started to understand and had that aha moment of mocap of, you know what, like every time I sit down and I take video reference for how I want to animate a shot, right? After I get all that reference, I kind of have to look through it and go, okay, I want to take maybe a little bit of that, or I like that piece, or let me try this. And you spend the time blocking it out, and you go, this kind of works, or no, let me change it a little bit. With mocap, I was getting to film all that reference and then very quickly implement it in game and see which one of those things worked, right? And go, okay, that's great. Like this is working, and this thing that I originally thought was going to work doesn't work. And I think it very quickly gets you from like 0 to like 50 to maybe even sometimes 60%, like almost instantly. And so I got really excited about that. And then adding on top of it was, I think anytime that you have a few people in a room that are really dedicated to close to a unique, like a singular vision, right? You see that like your brains start to meld together and come up with things that you wouldn't have come up with on your own. And when I was in a mocap studio with an actor or a couple actors, and I'm like, okay, this is the scene and this is what we're thinking. And I go, this is what I was thinking. They go, okay, sweet. Let me add to that. And then they add something into the performance. And you go, oh, that's awesome. I really like that bit. Let's do that. But now also do this. And man, I just felt like in love with it. Like it was so much fun to, sit there and essentially get to run around and it's play. Like, and it really is. It's play. And I think there's something magical between like when you're playing in the mocap space and it's for a game in which people are going to be playing in. I think there's a magical moment there.
So you're kind of treating it as shooting reference to a degree.
Yeah, I think it depends on the game. But for me, a lot of it is like shooting reference, and then hopefully you have the tools that allow you to quickly and easily adjust and amp up the timing and adjust the timing and amp up the poses. And, I remember going into it thinking like, I'll just take a couple poses from it and then throw out all the rest. But I mean, there's still like these really interesting little moments of humanity that happen in between there that if you just say, I'm going to throw it out, you lose some of that. So the best places I've worked, like Monolith had some really great proprietary tools that allowed you to very quickly like make something snappier or extend it a little bit to make it a little bit slower, or, very quickly control it to push the pose. And once I started thinking of it that way, it's kind of like clay, right? Where, in the mocap room, you're taking the block and you're quickly roughing it into something. And then once I get it back to my desk, now I'm getting to kind of go in with those potter's tools and really kind of craft out the bits that I really like and kind of smooth away the parts that I don't, as opposed to looking at it and bringing back this kind of somewhat formed piece of clay and then just going, I like the head, I don't like the body, just nuke all the body. It starts to feel kind of disjointed then, right?
Yeah. One thing I think which is fun if the animator gets a chance, often the animation director or the lead animator will be on site, but when you're able to bring in your team and they get to shoot their system they're working on or be responsible for that system, and when they're shooting it, they're shooting it as like they're shooting reference, but they're knowing that the creative input they're putting into that reference that they're going to be using is still their input. So
Definitely.
if you get sometimes if it's something really simple and it doesn't require this over the top or amazing acting or being acrobatic, you could put on the suit. Like I've been in the suit a few times. I know a lot of other directors have been into the suits, just to kind of rough out their ideas. So they'll put the suit on, shoot the mocap, and thinking it as reference just to kind of figure things out, and then picking that best performance or the performance they think is going to help build and mold that game. Do you often have your animators, or do you invite your animators to come shoot or plan their own reference? I mean, their own mocap shoot?
Yeah, I think anytime that you can get whoever is going to be cleaning up the data involved in the actual capturing of it, I think that animator is always going to be way more invested, right? And I think that's usually why, like as animators, like we want to be invested in the characters that we're animating, and whether that is suiting up, or in my case, like I'd much rather direct somebody because they're probably more physically trained to do that stuff. Like I know when I act something out and it's supposed to be like this cool, awesome acting thing in my head, I'm like, oh, this looks great, and then I look at the video and I'm like, no, I look like the Star Wars kid. But what's cool about mocap is I get to go in with this idea, and then somebody that can actually look, like Ray Park as opposed to me, is awesome, right? So where I've actually suited up has been like, oh hey, here's this old decrepit mage. Okay, I can play old and decrepit. Or like here's a big lumbering troll. Okay, I can look like a guy who can't keep balance. So in those cases, then I think it actually was a benefit because like at Monolith, the mocap actors we had were so well trained in all these different forms of martial arts that anytime you're like, I want somebody that's big and heavy and a little clumsy, like their bodies just can't do that, right? Like they're so like they're honed, like their musical instrument, right? That they're trained to do that. I was like, here, let me put on the suit, and I'll sit around and scream and be loud and throw things and
get paid for it.
Yeah, like my biggest thing every time I go into a mocap studio is trying to get them to stop thinking about their fact they're in a mocap studio. So the first thing is like always be vocal. Like if you've got that suit on, if you're running and you're supposed to be angry, like be screaming while you're running. Like yeah, even if you're not picking up the voice, you can a scream does things. It inflates your chest, you know what I mean? And it carries through the way you're moving your body. That if somebody's just silent and running, it's not going to be there, right? So like with the case of the Reaver on Singularity, they were supposed to be blind. So anytime I had a mocap actor doing that, I'd either blindfold them or tell them to keep their eyes closed. And I would purposely put little foam blocks in the space so that they would kind of trip and stumble a little bit to add some of that little happy accidents into what they were doing, right? And anytime you can kind of add that, and I think that's a lot of the stuff that's missed in mocap because so many of the really creative animators, they're like, I just really care about the craft of animation, are so against mocap because of the way it's been sold as like the silver bullet to remove animators, that a lot of the times in the studio, you don't, it becomes a little clinical, right? And you don't kind of get that zany animator stuff that you kind of want to happen. So I think that's one of those talks I'm excited about at GDC is anytime you bring up mocap to somebody that's never done it or had a bad experience, they go, oh, this is terrible. I hate it. It's not art. And you go, well, it can be. Like there's still the ability for you to inject some of your own intent into it. So.
Well, the art is directing. As animators, and I know I talked about this often, that animators can be actors, but they also can be directors. They're directing their performance. Regardless if it's keyframe or mocap, why they're posing out the character, they're directing the character to do something. They're wanting the character to be alive, of course, and be believable and connecting with the audience or with the player. But you're not just an actor, but you're also a director. And being the director of your shot is as much fun as being the actor of the shot. And I think with mocap, you get to focus a little bit more on the directing part and bringing out that essence from the actor who's in the mocap suit. So
yeah, totally.
I wanted to know what you think the future has. I mean, what kind of technology you think is going to really push animation to improve, or what I'm thinking is like, procedural stuff, subskeletal animation stuff. Like, what do you think the future has or is going to bring for animation and for games?
I think that's a lot of it, right? Like you look the way it's been going, because the answer to a lot of the stuff that games are trying to do is by throwing more content at it. The reality of it is you need new ways of allowing things to kind of layer together, right? So it is layering, it is the procedural stuff, it is like the full body type procedural stuff, and that it gets kind of scary, right? Because you start talking about like all this procedural animation, and that's kind of like the next step of mocap, where people go, whoa, like the computer is totally in it. Like you don't even have a human acting this stuff out. It's like the computer is taking control. And that's where I really think the idea of looking at the whole systems comes together, in my mind, as the animator's role isn't just, I'm going to animate this cool punch. It's like, I need to animate this cool punch and think of, the emotions that we're laying in, or the contextual parts of the world, like they might be leaning up against something, or they might be, scared of something or shying away or running away, like how all these things kind of layer together. I think that's definitely where it's going to have to go, because at a certain point, like, you can only plan on so many specific animations. And I think the games that are really starting to excite people the most are the ones that you can't really plan on, like, the Skyrims and the Minecrafts and those happy accidents that just kind of show up. And, a lot of that's going to come from how all these bits and pieces probably work together. But it's kind of weird. Like I haven't done a whole lot of those, because especially now moving into like with MMOs, a lot of that tech isn't even there. So I'm kind of on the outside going, okay, what are you guys going to do? Like, where's, a lot of these things that are these highly scripted games are the ones that are kind of pioneering that stuff. And I think as the technology increases, it's going to be, okay, let's take those things that we're only capable of before when we had these more linear experiences and open them up into these bigger play spaces.
How do you think that affects the animator's job then? You spoke about some of that, but can you elaborate a little bit more for someone like myself who doesn't have quite that gaming background?
Yeah, I think what would excite me the most, and I think, I think you would definitely get those two divides of, well, then we're just going to have people that are responsible for crafting these things, and then it's really easy then, I think, to just feel like that cog in that wheel and just start crafting it, or then getting even more involved in the conceptual side of it up front, so that it isn't just, okay, I'm in charge of this character, and up to this point in games that's meant, okay, I do its walk, I do its run, I do its attacks, I do its jumps. But I think now it's going to be like, okay, I'm in charge of this character, and I need to make sure that this performance works within all these different things of layers that are going in, right? And it does start to become like, I'm the director of this character, right? And as the animator, I'm directing all these little moments, and then the game is kind of choosing, like an actor would, how they want to hit their mark, how they want to kind of say their line or use what sort of inflection, right? So I definitely think that's one way. And then I think just because of the reality of games, like it's broadened, right? So with iPad games and social games and things like that, I think it isn't going to be like it's just this one way. A lot of the stuff we're doing this generation will probably be picked up by like iPad games, right? So you'll still have those smaller creations that allow you to just focus on the pure animation craft, or you'll have those bigger games that allow you to kind of focus on directing the entire character, right?
Right. It's kind of like what you're going back to when you said you're really into a lot of indie games right now.
Right.
And that's a very big market for a lot of animators, because they still need animators for that kind of stuff.
Totally.
I'm just kind of curious, like, to see what people think of games and where it's going. Do you think how can I say this? How far away do you think game animation will be to film animation, like in terms of performance and fidelity, making characters feel like they're really giving all this emotion, you're really part of a story, or it's really telling the story? Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean? Like, how far away from?
I'm like, I think already if you look at something like, I think what was limiting us for so long was the fact that we didn't have the controls to do that as an animator. Up until this generation, half the time you didn't have facial controls, right? It was just like a face painted on a polygon. And, if you were lucky, you had like the mitts to animate with the fingers, right? So
right.
I think because the constraints of the technology, it kind of kept a lot of the people that were probably interested in driving the craft of it in going into film, right? Because that's where you could actually do it. So I think with this latest generation of consoles actually allowing some of that stuff to exist. A lot of the limitation didn't necessarily come as much from the actual rig as just the time that it takes to craft those, right? Because yeah, I've got all these controls, but they still want games to come out at the same clip that they used to, on previous generations. I was like, guess what? You got a lot of face controls, but you don't get to animate those until like the last 2 months of the game, and you're like, oh, son of a, how am I supposed to? What? So I don't necessarily see time getting any better with the next consoles, but I definitely think because the tools will entirely exist and the visual fidelity will be there, I think the expectations of what's capable is going to push people into doing it more. I guess my short answer is like, I think we're already starting to get there, and I think if we want to get it further, it's less reliant on the technology, and it's 100% reliant on us as animators saying this is important, and we can't let it slide, and we can't just say, well, our hands were tied because the design kept changing, or I didn't have any chance because it was too fast of an action. Like, we just kind of need to stop using that as an excuse, even if they are valid excuses. Yeah. And just step up to the plate and do it. And I think, games are getting there, and a lot of leveraging the fact that we just don't have the time to do it is thinking about, well, the experience as a whole. And, like this year, like was the first time a game actually made me like well up a little bit emotionally. Like I got done playing Papo and Yo. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to play that, but it's this game about this boy who has a monster, and whenever the monster they're like best friends, but whenever the monster eats these frogs, it turns abusive, right? And it's a straight metaphor for the guy who was the creative director on it, of his father was an alcoholic growing up, and that relationship. And by the end of it, I was like emotionally like drained. I was like, wow, like I had tears in my eyes, and I was like, this is amazing. Like this game made me tear up. And I was like, yeah, the animation's rough in places, but there was still that emotional connection. And I think more animation could have done it. Maybe would have made me even attached to it more. But I think the ability to make emotive games that make you care about the characters is already there. So for it to not look better is really just on us.
And it seems like when somebody actually is willing to do that, then it kind of sets that standard where the player/audience is less forgiving if a game doesn't do that.
Exactly.
So they kind of start getting used to that kind of stuff. You start seeing certain things that were acceptable maybe years ago, that if they're still doing it now, and you see it in other games where they aren't doing it, the audience is kind of going, what's going on here,
Yeah, you get dinged for it. Yeah.
So I think it's just that kind of that slowly but surely kind of pushing what as animators you want to be able to do, and someone willing to actually allow to be able to do it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to plug here or talk about while we got you?
What GDC panel are you looking forward to the most, or?
Yeah, I think so. The creative director on Papo and Yo is going to be doing a talk, so I'm definitely excited about that one.
Yeah.
I've started to look at the main conference talks, and I'm interested in I thought the writing for Borderlands 2 had some genuinely funny moments, and games are really hard at being funny. I think they're really good at when they glitch being funny, but actually writing them to be funny, I think is hard. And I think they did a good job with that one. So I'm interested in hearing that one. And there's usually ones of these they're called micro talks, and they're like you get like I think it's like 2 minutes or 10 minutes to do a talk, and it's like a bunch of ideas just thrown at you like a shotgun. And and then usually it's the talks I don't even expect that all of a sudden come out of nowhere and like get you so excited. And like being to all these different conferences, GDC is the one that I always come back the most creatively excited, because you see all these different people in different disciplines, all with like the same idea of let's make games better. Mm-hmm. And this is how I did it, or these are the ideas I think of how we can do it. And you get out of it and you're just like, I just want to create, like whatever it is you do, you animate, you design, you model, you draw, you come out, you're just like, I just need to create something right now, or else I'm going to go crazy.
Give me your computer.
Yeah, that's definitely the thing I'm most excited about.
Now, Rick had mentioned that the animation at GDC, with these talks and stuff like that, it's kind of more new for this portion of it, right? Yeah. This is the first year for the boot camp. So
awesome. This is like all right. Let's prove that animators want more of a say in game development, right?
Sweet. Very cool. Like Rick had mentioned, we really do appreciate you want to kind of pioneer that a little bit here, and again, just kind of expand what we as animators want to do. So
yeah, well, I'm excited to talk to you guys because I mean, when I saw, iAnimate taking on and wanting to do game focused stuff, I was like, oh, this is great, right? Because you get all these different reels from these places, and you're like, oh, yeah, the animation is great, but we're in the middle of production, and I don't know if they can jump right into it. And giving people this taste of like, okay, they understand what our needs are going to be, and they know what to expect and stuff is just great. I'm like, that's fantastic. You guys are geniuses. bravo to you guys. That's why you guys were some of the first ones I want to talk to. I was like, I need to talk to these guys because
awesome.
I can see that singular bit. I'm like, they're driving to the same thing I want to drive towards, and that's awesome.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's been the case for both the feature and the games, as it's actually becoming more of a training ground, but also a mini studio or internship. A lot of our students are just getting that grounding, so when they do hit the ground running at a studio, they are ready.
Yeah. Let me maybe you haven't heard, but we're currently making a test level for our students where they're going to be creating animations and integrating it into Unity. So they're going to get some really exciting things to do. That's
very cool. Yeah, seeing it in game is always that moment of, oh, it looks great, and I animated it. It looks awesome in the software, and then you export, and you're like, wait, that doesn't look the same. That can't even be the same thing. I swear that's not what I just animated.
Yeah. Where's my animation?
Yeah. Did that export make it worse or something? Why is that? Yeah. So that's awesome. Good on you guys.
Very cool. Well, Michael, we do really appreciate your time, and looking forward to GDC. I know Rick's going to be up there, and maybe we'll get you on shortly after and hear how it went.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Very cool.
All right,
thanks a lot, guys.
All right, take care.